And here comes our friend.
The world has caught a virus, so I've written you a poem. We need your help to cure it, so stay the fuck at home. And if you have got 12 kids or you're living on your own, lock it down and isolate and stay the fuck at home. If you think you're not at risk here, you're living in a dome. It spreads faster than a hooker's leg, so stay the fuck at home. I need the gym, I need the beach, I hear you bitch and moan. You need to grow a brain cell and stay the fuck at home. But I feel fine, I don't feel sick. I'll go out on my own. How thick are you, you selfish prick? Please just stay the fuck at home. From LA through to Berlin, from Wuhan to Rome, there's people dying every day, so stay the fuck at home. If you need to contact family, use Facebook, Skype, or phone. We've got the fucking internet, so stay the fuck at home. The only way to slow it down is isolate, not roam. Please help the world get back on track and stay the fuck at home. Stay the fuck at home, stay the fuck at home. Don't you be a fucking dick, please stay the fuck at home. Stay the fuck at home.
Okay. Hello, for anybody who's watching in or watching this on YouTube eventually. This is Going Viral. It's episode for the 22nd of September in 2021. Tonight we have myself, Ken Aaron, on the West Coast. On the East Coast we have Alexander Stavropoulos and James Dingeman and Dennis Goldstein. And perhaps joining us a little later will be Mike Jankowitz. So what we're going to do here is we're going to give it over to Alex because he's the manager of
Clips guy.
menagerie of clips. And so go for it, Alex. What are we going to start with?
Yes. So we're going to start with some news about the bipartisan infrastructure and stimulus bill, the $3.5 trillion, and an apparent, victory by the progressive parts of the party and kind of, playing hardball for once. And in this case, with the actual backing, I think, of Pelosi and Joe Biden, which is the reason why they won, in order to, win some concessions on this. So it's actually looking good. But again, this is David Dole, the Rational National, commenting on this. So yeah, let's play it. I'll probably have to drag
Anyone
back.
that is blocking the reconciliation at this point is
You guys are hearing that, right?
the president's agenda, against the Democratic agenda.
Progressive Democrats flexed their power with a big win ahead of the fight for the $3.5 trillion budget bill. Then they flooded cable news with their message. So I have those clips coming up in a minute here. First, to quickly summarize the fight, if you don't know already, half of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, so about 48 progressives, House members, will only vote for the bipartisan infrastructure bill if the $3.5 trillion Build Back Better budget bill passes first. So the bipartisan infrastructure bill is in many ways largely a giveaway to corporations, though it does have some good provisions in there, like replacing lead pipes. But the real benefits are in the $3.5 trillion budget bill that includes Medicare expansion, dental and vision, paid family leave, universal pre-K, free community college, extended child tax credits, child care programs, and a climate change investment. So among other provisions in that bill. So that is where the actual benefits are for Americans. The infrastructure bill, largely a corporate giveaway, which is why you had 19 Republicans sign on to support that one. But before any of this, before the fight for between these two bills, you have here progressives flexing their power. I'm not sure if this is related to this in any way, but I feel like it sort of is, showing you they are out there giving an example of how they can use their power and that they're willing to use it ahead of the fight for the $3.5 trillion. So this is what they did. Progressive Democrats succeed in removing $1 billion Iron Dome funding from bill. So progressive Democrats, in particular, AOC, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, Ayan Presley, and Jayapal, they were successful in forcing Democratic leadership to take out money that was going to go to Israel in the debt ceiling bill. So this is a whole separate bill, but they were successful in removing defense funding for Israel, which is incredible. So obviously this is a reaction to how Israel has the ongoing treatment of Palestinians there, the apartheid state that is Israel and the occupied territories. So you have here a situation where progressives are standing up for their values and succeeding, showing that they are, in fact, I think, willing to use their power when it comes to rejecting the bipartisan infrastructure bill unless the budget bill passes first, as they have been saying for months now. Now, before I get to several of these clips of them on cable news, and there's several congresspeople on cable news discussing this fight, just to quickly go over some of the some items here. So you have 17 Nobel Prize winning economists backing Biden's $3.5 trillion Build Back Better plan, and actually saying here, they refuted arguments made by Republicans and moderate Democrats that the massive human infrastructure bill, which will provide funding to expand education, healthcare, childcare, and climate efforts, is far too expensive. So you have here 17 recipients of the Nobel Prize in Economics supporting the $3.5 trillion Build Back Better package in rejection to, Manchin and Sinema, who are against it. Now, obviously, the influence of corporate money on, in particular, those two senators, but even, politics, of course, as a whole, but on those two senators, when it comes to this bill, is the reason they are right now continue to be against it. But it just, how many more holes do we have to blow in the arguments from Manchin and Sinema about how it's too much money when you have Nobel Prize winning economists here, 17 of them backing President Biden's infrastructure or his Build Back Better budget bill. Now, a little more. So you have Sunrise Movement targeting Kristen Sinema for obstructing the Build Back Better Act. Obviously here, they say, who do you work for? We know who she works for. She doesn't care about actual individuals. But it's good to see the fight, not even just, of course, within Congress, but also outside of Congress with movements like this, with activists like this, forcing or showcasing these sorts of actions. Tweeting out here, you have failed us, Kristen Sinema, face the crisis or get out of the way. We need clean air, water, public transportation, education, millions of good paying jobs now. And of course, this is in their support of $3.5 trillion and calling out Kristen Sinema being against it. Now, one last thing here before I go on to the clips. We are trying to save it, progressives say, as right-wing Dems sabotage Biden's agenda. So this is a common theme you're seeing throughout the commentary, throughout the message being put out there by progressive Democrats, that this is not just the agenda of progressives, but it's the agenda, first of all, of the American people. When you look at polling, the vast majority of Americans, whether they're conservative or left-leaning, support this agenda. But also, it's Joe Biden's agenda. So you have Kristen Sinema, Joe Manchin, Democrats obstructing the Democratic Joe Biden agenda. And that is the correct way to frame this, especially when it comes to the press and how they put these messages out. So by framing it this way, which is the correct way to frame it, but usually you have progressives laying down, barely fighting. But by framing it this way, they're showcasing this isn't simply a fight of progressives versus moderates, so-called moderates, or progressives versus conservatives, but in fact, it is a fight of the entire Democratic Party, including Joe Biden, versus Manchin and Sinema, two fake Democrats. Now, let me get to these cable news appearances. So last night, you had on, there's everybody. So there's Jayapal, there was Katie Porter, there's Cori Bush. I believe there were even maybe a couple others, but here are some clips from those appearances last night of them fighting for this $3.5 trillion budget bill.
I will not support and vote for a bipartisan infrastructure bill that comes before reconciliation, because we know that reconciliation won't happen.
This is the Democrats' agenda, and we are willing to vote for both bills. Anyone that is blocking the reconciliation bill at this point is voting against the president's agenda, against the Democratic agenda.
You converted a Republican seat to a Democratic seat. You obviously know how to talk to Republican voters, and you know how to deal with that dynamic in your district, which not all Democrats do.
We want to make sure that both bills are moving together, and we're going to hold to that commitment. And so, yes, half our members, more than half our members, will not move the bipartisan bill without the reconciliation bill being passed.
Well, I think with the question to put to these conservative Democrats, and I've had some of these conversations, including tonight, is what do you want to cut? Tell me, do your constituents not have trouble paying for childcare? Are your constituents not worried about climate change? Are your constituents not in need of roads and bridges? Do your constituents not struggle to pay for the price of prescription drugs?
Wait, now, first of all, nothing about taking the bipartisan infrastructure bill. That will come first. What do you have to say to that?
Try us.
That last clip is my favorite. Try us. Try us. So, we're gonna see. And I think based on all their actions, why would they cave now? They've been holding to this for months now. If Manchin and Sinema don't want to support the budget bill, then they're going to tank the infrastructure bill as well. That's what's going to happen. And you have here, so I put that Katie Porter clip in there, that first one where Lawrence O'Donnell of MSNBC mentions how Katie Porter flipped a red district blue. It's important to bring this up because, oftentimes the arguments that are coming from these conservative Democrats is that, all these Democrats, these progressives, they're all these safe districts. No, you have Katie Porter here who flipped a district blue, fighting for this 3.5 trillion because she understands what voters actually want, and she isn't bought off by large corporations the way that some other Democrats are. So she is willing to stick out this fight, and it really blows another hole in the bullshit arguments coming from conservative Democrats like Manchin and Sinema. One last thing here.
Okay, so we can only hope that they wind up being successful in, forcing the passage of the infrastructure bill by, connecting it to the stimulus package by connecting it to the infrastructure bill, and then, leveraging that, saying, they'll kill one if, Sinema and Manchin don't vote for the Build Back Better package. So, and I'll give them credit here for, actually playing hardball, which is, of course, how you get things done in actual real world politics. So, just whoever wants to give their own 2 cents, and I'm sure we have different opinions about what's going on here and how much we think this really is the progressive wing. Yeah.
I have a question, just a clarification. What are they referring to when they say the reconciliation bill?
That's again this reconciliation process where they can, since it's a monetary bill, they can pass it with just 50 votes plus the vice president breaking the tie in the Senate.
So it's not
There's
subject.
The whole proceed, they have, but it has to be a very specific kind of bill again, and they can only do it, after this long process, and it's,
In other words, they'd get around the
right.
The 60 vote minimum.
Yeah,
but what are the requirements for that?
Oh, there's a whole, well, it has to have to do with the budget. Of course, the Senate parliamentarian can't object to any part of it. And again, as we saw with a $15 minimum wage, you can get rid of the Senate parliamentarian, but they haven't done that, the Democrats. So that person has kind of a veto on in determining basically based on the rules, if it is a monetary, if it has something to do with the budget or not. Which again is that's how they argued that raising the minimum wage was not connected to the budget, so you couldn't include it in a reconciliation bill. Then there's all these things, like there's the Byrd Amendment that it has to follow. I mean, I don't remember all of the details off the top of it, but basically, they have to take a lot of time to usher it through. There has to be a specific amount of debate that's allowed on the bill. Then, a vote up or down on it. And again, they could pass it with all the Democrats plus Kamala Harris breaking the tie.
Okay.
And the maneuvering here is that, the progressives are saying, well, if you try and get, if you vote against this Sinema or Manchin, then you're not going to get your over $700 billion infrastructure spending that's a bipartisan. We're going to, sink that in the Congress, because they won't have enough votes without the Progressive Caucus to do that.
Oh, but what you're talking about the reconciliation procedure in the Senate.
Right. And then it's connected again to the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which is an additional, 600 or 700 billion dollars that was negotiated separately that Republicans are willing to vote for.
And this bill that they're trying to get through is $3.5 trillion.
Trillion, yeah. Oh, I mean,
Well,
it's really less, but yeah, it's still a good chunk of money. Yeah.
Well, billion doesn't count for much anymore.
Yeah.
But I have one other question. As I understand the phrase "Iron Shield" is an Iron Dome is an Israeli system to defend against incoming
rockets and missiles. Yeah, it shoots them down.
So why would somebody want to stop? I mean, I don't say we should be funding it.
The U.S. government funds the system.
Right,
we give them we're going to give them $1 billion here. They're proposing to give them $1 billion for that.
Yeah, but they do that every year.
Comes back because there's some American technology involved, so it's not all just going to the Israelis. But we are essentially subsidizing their and have been, of course, to the tune of even more money.
Oh, I know, I understand. But why wouldn't they just politically more astute to cancel a bill for aggressive weapons or anything like that, where they can use it to invade Gaza Strip or the West Bank?
I think it has to do with
this is defense.
Part of a particular kind of bill, and they can't do it with I think the other monies are they were voted for. I think either under Trump or Obama. So they're the kind of thing where it's spread out over a 10 or 15 year period or whatever. So that is locked in. You would have to get a majority of the Congress, I think, to basically remove it. But here they can, using their votes, they can, by threatening to torpedo this legislation, they can win some concessions, including that Iron Dome money.
I consider that's very risky politically.
Yeah,
isn't
They're
that
already opposing it? They're already opposing it. It's already being opposed by both conservative Democrats and Republicans. So let Dennis jump in. Dennis might have some comments.
Yeah, go ahead, Dennis.
The only thing I want to see the Democrats do is play hardball.
Mm-hmm.
They don't play hardball, my worst fears come out.
Yeah.
I mean, we can't. I've stopped counting on the Democrats to do anything positive. But the point is that since they seem to want to have something different and better, which is a Green New Deal or something equivalent, I wish they would fight for it. And the problem is that they don't fight too well. So I'll leave it at that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, first of all, this bill has overwhelming support from Democratic voters. It also has, surprisingly, about 25 to 36% of Republican voters support this bill, and independents support it. So it has broad popular support. Now, the issues are, I saw today, someone was talking about the debt issue being brought up in the politics of this, because of course it's going to increase the debt. You take a $3.5 trillion obligation and decide to spend this money, of course you're going to increase the debt. Now, the problem that I have with the counters to this, and I just wonder how it's getting down at the granular level in congressional districts and senatorial districts, and also into Republican districts, is that this is a tremendous benefit to most Americans. It's like, for example, if you have Medicare, Medicaid, it extends dental care, which you don't get with Medicare, Medicaid to the same extent. I think it even includes
eye care. I think there's some kind of eye care.
It even includes cosmetic dental care.
Oh, really?
Like,
okay.
Oh yeah. So guys without teeth can go get teeth. So there's all sorts of things about this. Now the question of
I think actually in that case it would, because we're talking about, again, some proposals in Canada to expand their national health care. They don't even have, I don't think, they don't have extra dental care, and which is a problem. They've been trying, the Liberals have been saying they're going to do it for for decades, basically, and have said this time that they're gonna do it. But yeah, they don't have. I think the UK NHS does have something like that. I think the French too. But yeah, not all countries have that. So this would be an improvement.
And like the bill, like they passed a bill of almost $500 billion last month to improve roads, and it won. But then the question is how it's going to go through the House. And this is, to me, this is ridiculous, because we know that the infrastructure of the country needs to be upgraded. So it's going to be interesting to see how this gets through. And we know the Republicans are going to do their best to sabotage this. And Manchin, and I'm just curious, Alex, what's your perception of Manchin and Christian Cinema? What's holding them up? Because I know they've compromised on some of these things, but now
Right.
they're like outright saying we're not going to support this.
Yeah. Well, one thing I think for Manchin is I think we mentioned it either last week or this week. It came up that he's personally invested in coal in West Virginia. He's got a company that does coal mining. So I mean, obviously, yes, we're a blind truster, but he still benefits personally. So there's that. And of course, again, there's always the campaign contributions that they both get. Again, I think they're saying Sunrise Moon was saying, I think Cinema had gotten like $330,000 from the fossil fuel industry in her various races. So obviously that's a factor. She's, and she probably thinks, oh, she's in Arizona. It's a, red state. And so she probably feels like she can't get reelected if she's seen as being for the Green New Deal so. And, again, she's one of these, which is kind of funny with her because, of course, as we've said before, she's a former member of the Green Party. So she should be for environmental legislation. But I guess that was, well, either she changed her mind or that was all just, some kind of ploy to get into a position where she could get elected. And then, she could show her real colors, basically.
Well, I don't know if you talked yesterday about Biden in front of the United Nations, but
we did discuss a little bit, yeah.
Right, because Biden, of course, did not go for a total funding for world global vaccination.
Right.
Which would have cost maybe, it would probably cost close to how much money was lost to France in that deal over the submarines, maybe close to 50, 60, $70 billion. If you're going to do it through the whole world. But anyway, go on.
Yeah. Or again, he of course hasn't said anything about doing anything about the patents, which would probably be the best way to do it. Releasing the patents, letting other countries produce them themselves and distribute them.
Right.
That'd be
We're
a
not going to
better
do
way,
that.
more efficient way to do it, and
right.
they have more capacity than just the U.S. or even U.S. and Western Europe together. I mean, India produces a huge amount a huge amount of vaccines, or can. All right, so next, continue on with some of this economic stuff. We have what's the Fed was, this is before they made the actual decision today, but this is kind of, they're essentially said today that they're not going to do it yet, but they're going to do what they call tapering off. That they're basically going to ease up both on the quantitative easing, all the money that there have been, the trillions that they've been making available to Wall Street, not just to Wall Street, but to U.S. corporations that are in any kind of difficult situation. They can basically borrow for free from the U.S. government. And then they're also talking about maybe raising interest rates to keep inflation down. And so this kind of talks about that in a short few minutes, what they're expecting and what might happen.
Traders are, of course, locked and loaded on the Fed meeting today, and that's where we find Yahoo Finance Fed correspondent Brian Chung for a preview. Brian, good to see you here in a very big Fed meeting today, to say the very least.
Yeah, certainly. Obviously, a lot has happened in the 6 weeks since the Fed's last meeting, but the big focus today is going to be on tapering. And that's where we begin if you want to think about this as my 3 top questions, or my FOMC, Federal Open Market Committee, 3 questions that I'm really focused on in this afternoon's announcement. Kicking it off with number 3, the question is really going to be, where are we on the taper talk? Now, the expectation is for the Fed to likely say that they advanced taper discussions in this meeting, but not actually announce anything quite yet. And that's because of below expectations numbers that we saw for the month of August, both in terms of the jobs report and inflation data as well. So it seems like Chair Powell could tee up some sort of announcement in November to say merely that we're getting that advance notice in this meeting. But coming in at number 2, my second question in the FOMC3, are you cool with those Fed officials making stock trades? This was a bit of a dark horse question that no one had expected the Fed to need to answer in the September meeting. But of course, this all coming after the media reports that the Dallas Fed and Boston Fed presidents made a number of multi-million-dollar transactions over the course of 2020. It calls into questions the ethics rules over at the Federal Reserve Board and the Federal Reserve System at large. So it seems like reporters, including myself, will likely be pressing him on that question. But the number one question in this meeting really concerns the dot plot projections. Number one, explain the dots. We don't know where they might be, but again, for a refresher, the dot plot is a projection of where the 18 members of the FOMC could see interest rates going. You can see ahead of you the last time we got a dot plot, which was in June. The median member of the 18-member committee saw the case for at least 2 interest rate hikes by the end of 2023. Keep in mind that because we're starting the later part of 2021 here, the dot plot projection that we'll get today will actually expand the horizon out to 2024. So in addition to whether or not we can see interest rate hikes that are projected through 2023 get raised, it's possible we could even get a little bit of a hawkish surprise for how many interest rate hikes these FOMC members see in 2024. So a lot of things to watch for in this meeting. And as a reminder, the press conference will start at 2:30. The statement and the dot plot will come out at 2. And of course, I'll have the full coverage of that right here on Yahoo Finance.
Brian, handicap this for us. What is the probability that Fed Chair Jay Powell acknowledges the Evergrande crisis?
Well, he'll at least get a question about it. Whether or not the Fed will want to hold its hat on any sort of downside risk on the Evergrande situation that's unfolding remains to be seen. And that's, I think, because by nature, it is an unfolding story. It's not necessarily so clear if the Evergrande will have financial stability implications rippling across the Pacific over stateside. Now, of course, it's obviously, when you consider this is a firm that's got over $300 billion in debt exposed in the world's second largest economy, the implication is that if it does fail, it may have global instability risk. Now, of course, the Fed chairman is probably going to say something along the likes of they're monitoring the situation, but aren't necessarily changing or tilting monetary policy while that news story develops. So it seems like you'll probably get a question about it, may punt on the implications of that, but simply say the Fed is monitoring the situation.
Big Dave.
Okay, so the Evergrande that they're talking about, again, that's what we talked about last night, Ken and Dennis, about this Chinese massive, $300 billion real estate company that's facing bankruptcy, and that people are saying could be as big as Lehman Brothers, although actually it's the amount of money involved is not as big as Lehman Brothers was. But it is a serious concern for world markets because it would be such a huge bankruptcy again, over $300 billion. And of course, again, people have been talking about there being, a bubble in Chinese real estate for years now. But again, yeah, so today when Chairman Powell actually made his statement again, they essentially intimated that, probably starting in December, they're going to start tapering off again all this quantitative, the quantitative easing, the Federal Reserve giving free money essentially to Wall Street and to certain American corporations. So, and then again, talking also about raising some point soon interest rates, which will obviously to keep inflation low, which they're, starting to see. Obviously that's, we've been kept hearing from Professor Richard Wolff that, the only thing kind of propping up capitalism is this kind of quantitative easing. And also, again, the number, I think, is like around 10% of U.S. corporations are what they call zombie corporations, in that, again, without the ability to borrow more money, they're basically defunct. So, I mean, what if they're really going to end, essentially over time, end quantitative easing? I mean, all those companies should basically go under because they can't exist without being able to borrow more money. So what if, which obviously the question is, well, what this could have very serious effects on the economy. And, then the question is, well, how much is the economy really recovered enough that can do this? Or is this going to generate basically a huge financial crisis? So I think, Dennis may have some thoughts on all of this if you want to, yeah. Or wait, I see Dennis may be away from his computer. So Ken, you got to unmute.
I know Dennis just came back and
Okay.
this is over my head. I only have about $4 or $5 million in the stock market, so I'm not qualified to talk about this.
And so Dennis, yeah, I know you have probably more economics knowledge than the rest of us.
I
so
don't
what are your
know.
thoughts on what's the tapering, quantitative easing, all this stuff? Yeah.
What I think is they're keeping the economy afloat, and we have the whole idea for the Republicans and for the corporate sector and the independent, billionaires is to not pay taxes. So
Right.
everything they're doing is to not pay taxes. And the problem is at that point, in order to pay for stuff, we have to start borrowing.
Yeah.
Because we're not getting enough money from the taxes. And that's a real problem. It's like you have an economy that needs to be invested in, and you really need a Green New Deal objectively, and you have a whole bunch of people who have a lot of influence who don't want a Green New Deal. They don't want anything where they're going to have to pay taxes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what they're fighting against, paying tax. And that happened, by the way, in the 1930s. They hated Roosevelt because
right
because he was. They went up. The taxes went up to marginal tax rate was over 90% at one point.
Right.
And they hated that, and they hated him for it. And they see the problem is they don't care about the economy. They don't care about anything except not paying taxes,
right.
And the stock
Yeah.
market keeps going up. So quantitative easing is a way to keep giving money to the corporations, which they're not going to spend on a stagnant economy. So they're not going to invest in production. So they put it in the stock market. As long as the stock market keeps going up, these people are satisfied as long as they're not paying any taxes. The problem is, I don't know what happened in the last couple of days on the stock market, but last week
it did drop like 2% one day, so they had a serious
how's
correction,
it
as they call it. Yeah.
Do you know how it is today?
It went back up.
It went back up. Okay, but the point is, they have this understanding that if their personal position is good, then everything's okay. But the overall structural situation is that the economy is stagnating. It's been stagnating at least since the what they call the Great Recession, 2007 to 2009. It's stagnating. And the only thing that you can do with a stagnating economy is to start investing. And the corporations don't want to invest because they're not going to make money right away anyway. And we have a problem. I mean, you can see the votes today. The problem with Cinema and Manchin. Manchin is a coal baron.
Yeah.
And he is actually voting for himself and how he's going to make money. And the guy is I'll just put it this way, he's a son of a bitch. That's what he is. And he's really screwing the country, and he's screwing his constituency. He's screwing everybody. And so is that woman, Cinema. and and all the Republicans. But what they're not doing is they're not screwing the billionaires and the multimillionaires and the corporate sector, because they're trying to make sure that they don't have to pay any taxes. The problem is that the economy is going to go into a deep nosedive after a while because we're not doing what we need to do. The whole thing with the Chinese, even though they're not a socialist country, but the Chinese invest. And the other thing is that that the state owns a lot of corporations, so they can control the corporate sector basically, and the state controls the financial situation. It's not privately owned. Our problem is that our finances are privately owned, and that's another thing is that their agricultural sector is all owned by the state. So they have a lot of control over their economy, and we don't. That is really the problem. The people who have the control over the economy are the oligarchs, and that's why we're going to lose out to China. We are losing out to China, and we're going to keep losing out to China. If we did a Green New Deal and we were serious about it, and we started to do something serious about the environment, we can compete with China, but we can't do it doing things the way the corporate sector wants. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, well, Jim, do you have anything to add? And I think Ken, did Ken fall asleep? Okay, there you are. Okay, you had your eyes closed, so I wasn't sure. But yeah, Ken.
Well, no, it's finance and it's international. And it's, when you compare the value of the dollar to the yen or to the yuan or, to the euro, and it's over our heads. The world, I think I would agree with Dennis. The world is run by a small group of people.
You need to listen to someone like Michael Hudson, who actually is an economist, who knows a bit about, get his or Richard Wolff's analysis. Or even Paul Krugman or someone like that.
I'm less concerned. I'm less concerned with who's got the money than the flow of money through the society.
Right.
That's the thing. It's so some guy buys a yacht, he pays the guy who makes the yacht. That guy buys groceries. If the money's flowing through, that's more significant than the rich and the poor. And of course, when you have such a diversion, it's called the Gini.
Gini coefficient.
Yeah, the coefficient.
It measures inequality.
That's right. So there's too much inequality. It's always a sign of collapse.
Right. And that is always a drag on the economy because rich people can't spend all their money,
That's right.
Bezos can't spend $180 billion a year. It's just not possible for him to do this. He can't buy, 11 million cars.
That's right. So if the money, but it's sort of like blood, and it's got to go through the arteries and the veins, and so things move around.
There's an economic term, something like it's like the speed of return or something like that.
Well, the major thing,
how many times, like if you put out a dollar bill, how many times it comes back over?
That's right. A dollar invested in a weapon in the military doesn't distribute.
It's less of a return.
It doesn't distribute as much as a dollar for
education. Is education always gives the best return.
Right. The best distribution.
Yeah.
All right. Well, first of all, the issue that they're debating is their perception of what should be when they pull back. They're basically putting $120 billion a month into the economy. And so the question is when they pull that back. And the perception is the issue of unemployment, because there still is large unemployment rates. I mean, we haven't recovered from the pandemic. There's still about 5 million jobs that were lost from before the pandemic, and the unemployment rates vary, of course, among different groups of people. So they're talking about how the Delta variant upsets their calculations, because they would more than, I mean, there's a split in the Fed. And the Fed, of course, you have to look on what's going to happen with the Fed. You know, is it a neutral instrument or not? Because it's a very political instrument in the sense that it can, at a macro level, spur growth or not spur growth. So what are the Democrats wanting to see in 2022 or 2021 into 2022?
Yeah.
They want to see economic growth, and they don't want to see a deflationary kind of hit that then affects the midterms. So that's another calculation, even though, of course, the Fed will say, oh, we're not paying attention to that. But trust me, you know, at the macro level at the White House, the economic advisors will indeed try to influence the Fed one way or another not to pull back on stimulus measures. So, you know, that to me is the key thing there over the issue of when do they decide to pull back and how that relates to unemployment. And that, I think, is where we're going to see them get impact from the highest law of the land, which would be the President of the United States.
Okay, so let's move on to this clip, which is actually some good climate news, which is, I don't know if you guys had heard, but today at the UN, you know, Xi Jinping didn't personally go. He delivered a taped address to again, of course, as we know, again, a bunch of leaders, including Joe Biden, have made, you know, making speeches all this week at the UN. It's their, you know, kind of, I know, yeah, state of the world kind of, you know, they do it every year. And so he announced that they're not going to build any coal-fired power plants overseas anymore, which, of course, again, good for climate issues. But here's what DW is saying about it.
Point for the planet and the beginning of the end of coal. President Xi Jinping has said China will stop funding coal-fired power plants abroad. He made the announcement in a pre-recorded message to the UN General Assembly in New York. China will strive to peak carbon dioxide emissions before 2030 and achieve carbon neutrality before 2060. This requires tremendous hard work, and we will make every effort to meet these goals. China will step up support for other developing countries in developing green and low-carbon energy, and will not build new coal-fired power projects abroad. Beijing is the only significant funder of overseas coal left in the world. It finances some 13% of coal-fired capacity outside of China. Now, among the countries in Asia receiving funding are Indonesia, Vietnam, Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh. Raifat Sang is a senior policy advisor at the European climate think tank E3G and joins me now from London. Raifat, how significant is this announcement for reducing global emissions?
Yeah, it's indeed a very significant announcement, and it's a step forward in China's climate policy. And it shows that, yet again, the tides are turning against coal power internationally. So at the beginning of the year, we saw that China, South Korea, and Japan were still major financiers of coal power projects abroad and internationally. And over the course of the year, we saw the dominoes fall one by one, with Japan and South Korea pledging that they will no longer use public money to finance coal power plants overseas. And China has obviously made the same announcement last night. And now China joins the ranks of these major financiers to commit to an end to coal, which created a great momentum for the Glasgow Climate Summit in coming November. So the significance about this announcement is that it will dry up coal finance internationally, because a lot of the projects, for example, in Southeast Asia, it's being funded by Chinese capital. And a lot of time, this capital is being used to unlock the risk of these projects, which will then bring in more private investors into these projects. So with this announcement, we will be seeing an end to a lot of projects in 20 countries, which adds up to about 40 gigawatts of coal power, which is the equivalent to the size of the coal power fleet in the entire of Germany. So this is how significant this is.
Yeah, it's a pretty big impact this is going to have. But then speaking about those Southeast Asian countries, particularly countries like Indonesia and Vietnam, for example, where coal-fired power plants are being financed by the Chinese, what does this lack of Chinese financing now mean for these countries?
Yeah, so I mean, like I said, because a lot of times Chinese capital, especially public money, is used to unlock risks for this investment, which would then pave way to other private investment. So now, without that, a lot of projects would not take off. But what is also significant about Chinese announcement yesterday is also the fact that Mr. Xi has pledged he will step up financing for other forms of energy, renewable energy, green energy, such as solar and wind. So obviously China will also be playing a role in the power sector in these countries. And the other thing we should note is that the economics is turning against coal. I mean, coal is becoming very unprofitable in a lot of countries. So the economics is also changing. So even with Chinese finance, the economic is changing, and we will see a reduction of coal in these countries anyway. And also these countries, including Indonesia, Vietnam, and also Bangladesh, they have signaled in the last year that they're going to phase out their coal power in one way or another. So, I mean, the demand from these countries also waning, and then the support for renewable power in this country will be increasing, and hopefully from Chinese financiers as well.
We'll leave it there for the time being, but thank you so much for that description. Bye for time.
All right. So Mike hasn't said anything so far, so maybe we should hand off to him first. Mike, you want to unmute. And what do you think about this huge shift in climate policy that Beijing is doing here? Yeah. Mike?
Well, I'm here.
Okay.
I always say, we'll see what they do. Talk is cheap.
Yeah. But they've usually followed up on these climate policy discussions, pronouncements, I'll say.
Alex, the problem with this is that they've expanded domestic coal production.
Sure, of course.
Dramatically. And they, in fact, introduced 43 new coal-fired plants this year. So, yeah, sure, it's probably, on the international scale, it's good. But domestically, they still are the main source of emissions of coal-fired pollution, and they haven't cut back on their expansion of coal-fired power plants inside of the People's Republic. So I have to say that, while we can have this sort of fluff feast from this guy Beeford Sang, it doesn't place in any kind of wider context the fact that they basically have a record high of carbon emissions this year.
Yeah.
So, one has to sort of take it with a grain of salt.
Mm-hmm.
And I would also add that, first of all, that's a point extremely well taken. I mean, it's an old maneuver to say, okay, we're going to, it's just like saying, okay, we're going to increase the price of this. We're going to double the price. And then we're going to show we're good guys by reducing it by 50%. But it's still 50% higher than it was. On top of that, again, China is saying it's going to do these things. It's talking about these plans. I don't think China is going to do anything until it solidifies an investment in source of power, until it gains control of it. The major powers, okay? You could talk around, the United States can do no right and China can do no wrong and, Russia can do no wrong, but somebody else can do no right. Come on. These are major powers, all right? There may be a little altruism mixed in there, but there's a power struggle going on. They have their own economic interests. They have hegemony interests. We'll see again what they do. If it's in their interest to get rid of coal and to reduce emissions, and they can set it up in a way that's in their interest, they'll do it. If not, then they're going to try to walk back what they said, and they'll play games. Right now, right now it's talk. Okay, I'll be only too happy if they do it, and I'll give them credit if they do that. But
no, and maybe it's not just, we saw how the Paris Accords were mostly talk.
well, of course,
Yeah,
and it's all mostly talk until it's actually done.
right. All right, Ken. So let's get your take on all this.
Yeah, as Jim said, I mean, even if they decreased, I saw one report that said they decreased it about 10% since from 2019 to 2020. But again, you had the lockdown in China too, so maybe there was a diminution. But the point is absolutely a 56%, 70%, a high percentage of their energy comes from coal. They build new power plants. This would be a good test to see what the Times or MSNBC or the Wall Street Journal, how it reports this fabulous altruistic effort. We're going to stop selling coal and supporting coal in third world countries, and tell them to go back and cut down some trees if they want to cook dinner. So what's worse, coal or deforestation? But in any event, I would like to see if the mainstream media presents in their articles about this the same statements that Jim made, that this is
or a lot of them may not even cover it.
Well, I think they'll cover that. They'll cover it, but they're not going to talk about. They got one hand behind their back with their fingers crossed.
Some of them have Chinese companies that advertise for them too. So
there
you go.
They're covering it.
Are they covering the fact that? Are they covering the fact that it's a fake thing?
Well, it's not. Well, first of all, internationally, it's not a fake thing. I mean, it is a good thing that they're cutting back on coal production overseas. I mean, one can say that's a good thing. But the issue of them increasing coal production domestically, they're all the print media is covering it.
Right. And I think they will talk about it in the sense of, well, because China is expanding their fossil fuel capacity, then there's no point in us, doing a Green New Deal. So they'll make that argument, definitely.
Well, that's the argument they've been making for quite a long time. But the main problem, of course, is that you have the prediction from the Paris Agreement that if we're on track to go above the danger mark of Celsius temperature,
1.5 degrees.
1.5.
Yeah, no, we're above the 365 particular parts.
Right. And that, of course, by the year 2060, that's going to cause huge. I mean, look, we just have to see what's going on right now globally. So it's going to be interesting to watch. I mean,
Michael T. Clary, who's writes about the intersection of climate change and defense policy, he's been actually had a very good article in Counterpunch a few weeks ago about how the serious problems China is going to face because of climate change, because of their particular geographic location, their population.
Right.
So his argument is, well, in the long run, the U.S. doesn't have to worry about, some kind of Chinese invasion, because they're going to spend all their time dealing with climate issues and climate change. They're going to have like these massive floods all the time and massive typhoons and droughts and, all the rest of it. Yeah.
See, to me, the acceleration of this is going to put interesting questions about how the United Nations and the rest of the world cooperates in handling these issues, because they're affecting all of humanity. And that gets back to what Biden did yesterday when you guys were talking about it. I mean, he didn't promise to essentially fund enough money to essentially vaccinate the entire globe, which is what's needed.
Yeah.
And this situation, if we look at what's going on down in Texas on the border there, which you may talk about later, these kind of things are just going to get worse. They're just going to get worse and worse because of the overall decline of global climate around the world. Anyway.
Yes, actually, that's
wait. Let's let Dennis has in said anything, so let's let him. Yeah. Dennis, what are your thoughts? Yeah.
Good point, which is that the effect of climate change is going to be felt before we reach so-called point of no return, because of the idea of becoming uninhabitable and mass migration. And that's something that's already happening now. And in addition to the floods and the viruses and the earthquake and the hurricanes.
Yeah, already that there's some good data that the Arab Spring was linked to issues of climate, to like there being a drought in Syria and other parts of the Middle East, and to the price of food being raised because of climate issues. But let's let Dennis. I assume you probably have some thoughts about China and climate here. Dennis? You there, Dennis? Okay, I guess if Dennis doesn't have anything to say, we can move on to the next clip, which is this coup in Guinea.
Well, hold on a second, Alex. Hold on a second, Alex.
Oh, you want to say? Okay.
Before you do that, the issue of China in all this is that, yes, I agree that, China, we shouldn't, glorify them, romanticize them. I think one thing important about China's policy in terms of the 1.5 degree goal is they oppose a focus on it. And they want more flexible language in the Paris Agreement on this issue. Why? Because they're an exporter of manufactured goods. And they also oppose carbon border adjustment mechanisms, which we know are carbon, those are complicated carbon trades, but essentially tariffs on imports to countries with limits on their own carbon production, such as what the EU does. The Chinese don't want that. So, the Chinese are a mixed bag about this. And of course, their retort is, well, you guys exploited the world for a couple hundred years. Why can't we? I mean, I've listened to Chinese actually say that. Yeah. So, but anyway, go on with the next story.
Yeah, so as I think we mentioned, but we didn't have time to get to it yesterday because there was, I think it was on the weekend, a coup in Guinea by the army part of the army taking over. And it has some interesting implications for international commerce because of Guinea being having the largest reserves of bauxite of any country in the world. So this here, Al Jazeera is talking about that issue and also about the coup.
Guinea is some of the world's largest reserves of bauxite, and now the race is on to exploit more of it. Despite the country's military coup and risks of economic isolation, supplies haven't been disrupted, and more is expected to be mined this year than last.
There is a strong commitment to protect the foreign direct investment and to continue attracting big and bigger investment in Guinea for the sake of valorizing the mining resources in Guinea.
Concerns were raised over the stability of supplies when a group of soldiers overthrew the democratic government in early September. That pushed up bauxite prices.
The government and mining companies here are hoping that the current high price of bauxite will continue. For the government in particular, the mineral represents more than 30% of its annual budget. Guinea's new military rulers desperately need to fund their programs.
In 2020, this West African country exported more than 64 million metric tons of the mineral, second only to Australia. Analysts say Guinea should focus more on processing the ore locally than exporting it.
We need to industrialize our bauxite again. We need to transform it from raw material to aluminum so that we will have more add value on it. This is very important for us. But now, if we send only bauxite, the raw bauxite, we won't have, let's say, many add value on it. It won't create jobs in our country. It won't create new tax.
Critics say decades of corruption and a failure to effectively regulate mining companies has left many people in Guinea in poverty and damaged the environment.
We cannot afford to toy with the mining sector today without having economic repercussions. On the contrary, we must open investments in mining projects that have been in the pipeline for a long time.
Guinea accounts for 24% of global bauxite supplies, and it's focused on one thing: maximizing revenues from the current windfall. But as some analysts point out, there is no guarantee the price of the mineral will go on rising. Ahmed Idris, Al Jazeera, Conakry.
Right. So to complicate things here, the military unit that staged the coup is one that was trained by the U.S. And Africa, our African command. So there are some suspicions of U.S. involvement in the coup, which is kind of reinforced by talk that Guinea, which again with the previous government had made all these deals, including for their bauxite with the Chinese, they're going to be part of the Belt and Road Initiative, and have China build infrastructure for them as part of certain deals. There's some discussion now that they'll kind of move towards selling the bauxite to the West and to the U.S. instead. So, of course, that leads to a lot of speculation as to, CIA involvement or U.S. involvement, certainly, again. Reinforced by the fact that, this is a U.S.-trained unit that did this. And certainly, again, it's, if they do shift from, investing and working with China to working with the U.S., that's a win for us and a loss for China. So there's great power implications with all of this. And then, of course, bauxite is key to aluminum, which is, one of the most important metals that we use in anything. So, for everything from aircraft to, or refrigerators and so on. So, so this is a coup that has, global political and economic implications. So I don't know if anyone has heard anything about this themselves or has their own comments.
Well, first of all, the Army of Guinea, the Army of Guinea is a Francophone army.
Right.
Was derived from the French colonial forces. And it had actually several coups against the governments in power. And it was involved in a whole variety of wars, including wars in Liberia, Sierra Leone, Guinea-Bissau, etc. And I don't find that implausible, your argument that the forces that the United States trained for Africa Command, in other words, all the different kinds of special operations forces that we've been training for the past.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if they're fighting for Boko Haram or something like that.
Well, they, remember the level of conflict is trans-regional in that part of Africa. They're fighting in Mali. They're fighting jihadist, movements all throughout the Sahel in Africa. But this, of course, is more in line with traditional, the kind of classical, let's concentrate our training efforts on certain key elite units inside an army. They are useful for us to recruit. They probably recruited as assets the officers, etc. The CIA station would always have as one of its targets interior ministry troops in African countries. So, you're probably right that this was sort of a engineered coup with the CIA. The question of the French is sort of interesting because these kind of areas of Africa were always the territory of the SCDC.
And there's a similar thing in Mali a few months ago, right? With the French.
Right. Well, there's an author on that I want to get us to talk to, who is at the Commonwealth University in London, and she just did a history of CIA covert operations in Africa.
Oh, really? Oh, you have to send me the title.
White Malice, and it should be fun. I don't know how we're going to do it. I don't necessarily want to put her. It's hard to get her at this time. But it's, but then you look at what's going on in all the African states. And the question of elite forces being trained by the United States and the West certainly applies to what's going on in the northeastern part of Nigeria when they're fighting against Boko Haram. So, yeah, I mean, that's sort of SOP for any kind of first world country that wants to create a force in a country that it wants to control, to take elite forces and train them and make them loyal to them.
Okay, well, Ken, Mike, Dennis, any of you guys want to add anything?
I just have a question which Jim will probably come right up with an answer. What is bauxite is mostly for manufacture of aluminum. What's the flow of the material? Is it going by boat up to Spain or all the way to France, or what's the distribution? Who's their main client for the business end of this? Where's the bauxite going?
Oh, a good question.
Yeah, we'd have to look it up. It's probably all over, actually.
That would be, yeah, that would be.
I think China, before now, China was getting a lot of it, I think.
Basically, they export about 82.4 million tons a year, and they're the largest exporter of bauxite in the world. But where does it go? I think, let's see. I'm looking quickly at
I would imagine it goes up to Portugal, and from there it gets distributed.
China. Mainly to China. And prices.
How does it get there? How does it get there?
It probably goes around the Cape of
Around the Horn?
Yeah,
by boat. And they're the second biggest producer of bauxite in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And the bulk of it goes to China, according to this source. So, so that's where it goes.
There you go.
But the question is, will it disrupt production flows to China? And that could be, international markets to China. And whether Alcoa gets in the act, I don't know. But that's an interesting question. It basically goes to China.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, and Jim, I was trying to remember, last night we were talking about, this whole we played the Rachel Maddow clip where, this whole revelation from Woodward's new book on Mike Pence talking to Quayle and trying to find a way to, throw the election to the Congress so that they could vote, one state, one vote, and give it to Trump. But I couldn't remember the two political scientists we had on to talk about that right before the election happened. Do you remember who that was?
It was Lawrence
two guys,
Douglas.
yeah. There was a guy who had written a whole book on it, yeah.
Lawrence Douglas from Amherst and Alan Lichtman from American University. But yeah, we can talk about that next week. I think I sent you guys a copy of the book, so
I had.
You can read it because it's chock full of all sorts of goodies.
Yeah, it was a good book, yeah. But it was interesting to get it confirmed, essentially. But also that Dan Quayle, of all people, would be advising Mike Pence that basically you can't do this. It's not legal for you to intervene and throw the election to Trump as much as you might want to.
Yeah, it's funny. Brian Sullivan was Dan Quayle's military aide.
Oh, really?
Vice president. How do you like that for a fun little story?
That's let Ken probably won't know his connection to us.
That's sort of funny. I always found that amusing.
Right. Brian Sullivan is one of the guys involved in the New York Military Affairs Symposium where we met Jim in the first place. Mike and me. So yeah, again, he's a very smart guy. He's very knowledgeable, especially about the Italian army in World War II. But again, it's a nice, interesting thing that he was working.
He's an apparatchik in the Department of Defense and CIA in Washington.
Right. Okay. So unless Mike, did you want to or Dennis? Sorry, I'll jump onto this thing about sorry. So this is a clip, Al Jazeera Rancher. Again, I kind of commented on this. I was wondering when they were going to go to Bagram to see the torture sites there, but Al Jazeera actually has a clip on it today here.
Oh, let's hear it.
Yeah. So this is quite interesting. They went back with people who were prisoners there, and they're recounting their stories. So this was very interesting. Yeah, I'll play it now.
They call it Little Guantanamo or Afghanistan's Abu Ghraib. Heading back to the notorious Bagram prison, these are some of the former prisoners. It's not easy to find the way in the sprawling 30 square kilometer town. Even the Taliban had to stop for directions. But once you enter, the scale of the prison complex, which once held tens of thousands of people, becomes evident. Building after building, door after door, the men which were once held here remember their humiliation and torture at the hands of US soldiers and fellow Afghans. Imitating what the guards did, they wouldn't let me sleep, says Fareed, who spent 7 years in different cages. He was in physical therapy for extensive torture by Afghan and American troops. He says tortured prisoners were hidden in another block, away from media and humanitarian organizations, until they would heal.
My legs are still weak and in pain. They yanked my private parts with a cable. I was bleeding from it for almost 6 years. No matter how many times we said we didn't do the crime, they would torture until the prisoners said yes.
From uniforms to prison cells, inmates here have been telling us that this was one of the worst places to have been mentally tortured. If they did not behave well, these air conditioners would blow very cold air during the winter and very hot air during the summer. Picked up in a night raid, Maulavi Hashmi remembers being blindfolded and paraded naked in the early years of the prison. He thinks they were being fed dog food, smelly meat as he remembers it.
American girls would come dressed in bikinis to take us to the toilet. We got 3 minutes for a bath, and these girls would watch us. Then there were no Afghan guards here. Nobody was allowed, not even the Red Crescent. They made us watch sexually explicit films, and we weren't allowed to look away. We were sleepless. Our interrogations were almost 10 to 12 hours.
Rights groups such as Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and the American Civil Liberties Union have corroborated similar testimonies of torture and abuse. In 2004, the US Army charged 27 soldiers and enlisted personnel with criminal offenses, some with maiming and involuntary manslaughter. Some prisoners were teenagers. They say others were brought from different countries on rendition flights. The complex was also home to the largest military base, a lifeline for US-led coalition troops in Afghanistan. Ahead of secretly leaving the base at night, US forces say they destroyed nearly 15,000 pieces of equipment and sent over 700 loaded C-17 aircraft out of Afghanistan. Scrap is what's left of Black Hawk helicopters, generators, vehicles, and other equipment. But the real stain on the legacy is the abuse. Tens of thousands illegally detained without trial. That's how they'd wake us up, says Qari Shahabuddin.
They knew we'd be upset if they disrespected the Quran, so they'd throw it in the toilet. I spent almost a year here. This button is for the toilet to flush. This was for hot and cold water. They'd put headphones to our ears, blindfold you, shackle your feet, and take you in a wheelchair to the interrogation room. It was a scary place. Bagram was a place of utter cruelty and barbarism.
Taliban fighters say they feel happy to be here once again as victors, not captives. Some feel the world knew them as barbaric monsters, which is how they see their captors.
All right, so it's interesting to, well, again, probably not too many things. Well, if you read anything about the torture program, you probably recognize, again, the things they said, including about, using women to, sexually humiliate the obviously pretend to be rather religious prisoners in this case, and to use that as a means of, psychologically going after them. Something else happened in Guantanamo, and other, of course, again, I think it's the infamous salt pit at a so-called, quote, at Bagram was notorious as a torture site. But it's interesting to hear from the former prisoners themselves talk about what happened to them. And, I mean, I don't imagine this is getting any play at all on in the American media, or, again, outside. Well, Al Jazeera, of course, is, for their own reasons, is going to bring this up. But I didn't see any similar clips from, say, DW or France 24 talking about this. So, although they may eventually do something, but it's, so let me let somebody else chime in.
I got a comment or question. I like asking questions. Was this between the years of 1998 and 2016?
No,
this is 2001. And
I'm sorry, it's 2001.
This is supposedly all happened under Bush.
Oh, under Bush, not under Obama.
Ooh, so through, yeah. Well, when did they kind of ended in what 2000 after the Abu Ghraib thing happened. It kind of or
Well, they were capturing guys, and what they had up to 20,000 men in this, and men and women at this base before they closed it down. It was the largest combat base in Afghanistan, and so it's interesting to see these guys come through, and also the NDS, the Afghan CIA and FBI combined, they would control parts of Bagram for the purposes of torture. So, like these guys.
Yeah, we know all about how we would turn over people, not just Afghan. We would send people to be tortured in Egypt or even Syria or Libya during this period.
No, these were guys captured, and basically I don't think they were renditioned. It's like they were.
Although they did say some people, they do mention some people being brought in from elsewhere. So obviously there were others, not these guys. I guess
this was all under the Bush regime.
Bush,
yeah.
Obama,
maybe
Trump.
some leftover Obama.
This went on from 2001 to the end of the.
Well, yeah, and remember who Trump chose as his head of CIA. The woman who's involved in the torture, Gina Haspel. So,
well, it didn't matter who he chose; they were going to do it anyway. I mean, these were people who were captured in the field. I mean, it's we were fighting a war there, and it's funny. Today, there was a classified hearing on Capitol Hill about Afghanistan, and I understand all the GOP guys burst out, pissed off that they were angry at the briefing. So who knows what the hell's going to happen? Oh yeah. So it's going to be fun to hear the stuff spilled out eventually.
Well, Mike, any thoughts that you have on? I mean, you've read some stuff about the torture program, I'm sure too. So I wonder, and we've debated it at the diner. The efficacy of torture and all that too.
The
so
diner doesn't count on this situation, Alex.
Well, just it's a way of we've discussed it. I'm just saying.
I think that it's been pretty well established that more often than not, torture doesn't work. However, I will say this little comment. I mean, in Afghanistan, yes, it's interesting to hear about these things, and I feel really bad for the people who are complaining who are held prisoner, because now that the Taliban's in power, they ain't seen nothing yet. Maybe you're not going to have sophisticated methods of torture, but so far, Afghanistan shows no sign of moderation. Yeah. So I think it's not exactly going to be like a breath of fresh civilization coming into Afghanistan. So,
well, no.
From the pot into the boiling water, and yeah, I mean, certainly the torture was wrong and everything, but I just feel for the people of Afghanistan. They they were going through some bad shit for the past 20 years, but it wasn't as bad as the shit that was happening before and the shit that's going to happen now. And I guess the Afghan people just can't catch a break.
Right. And I should mention that, in other Afghan news, the Taliban now, they're talking about getting that copper mine that, remember, they were working with the Chinese on to try and extract copper from it. They're talking about, putting it into operation. So that'll be interesting to see. Obviously, that would give them a source of revenue. And I'm sure the Chinese would want to work with them if they have the security in the area that would let them,
And it'll certainly take them up. Yeah. Certainly take their attention away from beheading women or who get raped.
Yeah. Well, money is what makes the world go around, right?
Just one question I have: would you think there would be a comeuppance between the Taliban and the Chinese in regards to the Uyghurs, the treatment of the Uyghurs in China?
The Chinese want the Taliban. One of the reasons they want to work with them is to make sure that they won't let any Uyghurs operate from their territory or cross into China from Afghanistan, because of course it's on the Chinese border. So that's part of why they want to have these ties and maybe have help the Afghan economy by doing this. In addition to
Well,
eating
no, they
profit
made it very
themselves.
clear.
Yeah.
They made it very clear. And the border's only, what, 90 miles?
Yeah, although it's a
Between
very
China-
mountainous part, so really,
Yeah, I mean,
most people will go through like the Tajikistan or Turkmenistan, I think, to get cross into China from there. Again, 'cause that's, it's like the Hindu Kush, basically. It's really, it's hard to directly cross again.
Oh, you're implying that China will say, look, we'll help you financially or whatever, or development wise, but you got to make sure that no rebels, no Taliban's coming in
Sure,
from
yeah.
Afghanistan into China.
Yeah, of course.
And we know you don't care about the Uyghurs, even though they're all Muslims. They're not part of your clan, so it doesn't bother you.
Right. Well, they were before September 11th. There were negotiations under the Clinton administration, and I think continue a little bit to the Bush administration, about building a pipeline from the Caucasus, from the Caspian Sea through Afghanistan to Pakistan to ship natural gas from the Caspian Sea down here to outflank the Russians. So, hey, the Taliban then were willing to work with, the great Satan in America. So,
well, no, they're
religious, but they're pragmatic too.
They've been meeting with the Chinese now for several years, diplomatically.
And the Iranians and the Russians.
The Iranians helped them overthrow the government, and they gave them actual military aid in the eastern part of Afghanistan. And the Chinese have been very explicit in terms of, remember, even before the government was overthrown, they were having meetings in Beijing with Taliban representatives. That happened in May and June. So this is all being worked out between them. And yes, the Uyghurs are going to get screwed.
Yeah. All right. Well, to get back to something we talked about yesterday, here's more. Here's more on the us and the French, and which we of course talked about a bit. But this is again, what was said at the UN today, and also specifically how Macron is kind of nursing, calling on Biden to do things to help, to kind of apologize and to heal the rift with France over the submarine deal that they blew up for the French and kind of jumped over them with the Australians.
Let's discuss this with our Foreign Affairs Editor, Philip Tell, who's with me now. Philip, do we know what Macron and Biden will say to each other when they speak today?
Well, first of all, you said this was a low point. This is probably the biggest low point in Franco-American relations since the Gulf War of 2003, when Jacques Chirac, the then president of France, decided not to follow George W. Bush with his decision to send troops into Iraq to get rid of Saddam Hussein. So we are in a situation where relations, let's say, are very tense between the two leaders. So there has been expectation over the last week that there was going to be a phone call between President Biden and President Macron, but nobody knew exactly when that phone call was going to take place. And the Americans were saying, well, we would like President Macron to call President Biden, but it's up to him to pick up the phone to do that. So it appears today that that is going to happen. President Macron was the big absentee from this week's UN General Assembly, where President Biden made his address yesterday. Normally he would have been there to talk, but he wasn't. That's a sign of the rift between France and the United States and Australia and the United Kingdom over this submarine deal. So they're going to be talking today, President Biden and President Macron. And I think that the underlying factor here will be that President Macron is going to criticize President Biden by saying this is not the way that allies should treat each other. We were very annoyed to find out that we were not going to be able to keep this deal just hours before the official announcement. Why was there no discussion about this beforehand? Why did you not pick the phone up to talk to me, to tell me what was going on before this announcement came through? I think France is very hurt and upset by the way it's been treated in all of this. And that's going to be, I think, the key complaint by President Macron towards President Biden is, well, why on earth didn't you tell us before? And we're very upset that we didn't know about it.
And it sounds like, Philip, from what you're saying, that it's unlikely that this phone call is going to mark the end of this row. This is going to go on, isn't it?
No, this is not going to end the row. French and American diplomatic relations or foreign relations are always a bit like a roller coaster ride. They're sometimes excellent, sometimes not good. Well, we're in a not good period right now. I think there will be some smoothing over the cracks from President Biden, who will underline the fact that France is a key ally, that France is a military strength. I mean, for example, France is the largest European military strength in the Indo-Pacific region, with 10 ships, including 4 frigates there. I think President Macron will be keen to underline that to President Biden, saying, well, look, you know, you need our help in that region. You should be treating us better than the way you've been doing so. And this submarine deal, the scuppering of this submarine deal, is bad news for the French economy. It's bad news for French industry. It's bad news for the French workforce. We've been working on it for years. Why weren't we told about this beforehand? So I think this will be a conversation where there will be let's say, a frank talk between the two presidents, trying to iron out some kind of entente between the two of them. But the damage has been done, and I think France is very angry about this still, and this will just be the start, maybe, of a make-up between the two presidents, but we won't be over just yet.
Well, we'll see what happens, Philip, when we get news of that phone call later today. Thanks very much indeed, Philip.
All right, so of course this is France 24 doing this clip, so we're getting the French, well, to some extent, the French official position on this, or at least, you know, from French media. So yeah, so again, they're definitely more than annoyed with us, and you know, there's a major amount of, you know, we're talking tens of billions of dollars to the French defense industry. We kind of, you know, jump past them. There were, again, a lot of issues that, you know, I don't feel, well, we have time, so we want to get in, you know, really, basically, the French were going to take basically the submarine, the platform or the shell that's really built for nuclear power plant and put a diesel plant in it instead, because you know, there are issues about nuclear power in Southeast Asia, and you know, issues about nuclear. Well, especially now, if they go, the U.S. is proposing that they will use highly enriched uranium, the way the U.S. does for its own nuclear subs. So there's an issue about nuclear proliferation, because in theory, you know, we'll be providing them, or the British will be providing them highly enriched uranium that could be used to make a nuclear bomb. The French were going to provide low enriched uranium that's not suitable, and has to be further enriched if you want to turn it into a nuclear weapon. So, in fact, again, and even if the Australians don't build their own nuclear weapons program now, which I know if they do, then this could be a way for other countries, again, basically buy some nuclear subs with highly enriched uranium and use it as your way to, you know, get your own nuclear weapons too. So there are issues with the non-proliferation treaty. The New Zealanders are really pissed about this because their policy is not to allow any nuclear ships or weapons onto their soils. So they've made a big stink themselves about the Australians doing this, you know, despite also being, you know, obviously close to the U.S. themselves. There are also issues of, you know, what this, of course, is related to concerns about national security concerns about China, the South China Sea, and all that. So, you know, we could talk about a lot here, and I'm sure Jim, have quite a few thoughts about what this all means. But or if Mike, you want to?
Yeah. I mean, I just have a really, well, first of all, as far as Australia getting nuclear weapons, Australia can get a nuclear weapon whenever it wants. You know, they're either going, I mean, all they have to do is say to the United States or Great Britain, you know what, we need a couple of nuclear weapons, and they're there. Especially with the situation with China right now. So I don't even think that's even a basic issue there. But I have a rather simple question. Isn't it, you know, if you're buying a submarine, isn't it a matter of getting the best sub or the sub for your purposes. I mean, France can kick and scream all they
Well,
want.
and actually, that's a diesel sub might have been better because I guess if you're hope they were talking about, well, we're expecting that to like operate like at the in the Straits of Malacca or like in the Taiwan Straits in basically brown water areas, and as we know, well,
but
a
Alex,
diesel sub is better. Obviously, a nuclear sub is kind of better in the open ocean, but the argument is that a diesel sub is more appropriate in these kind of.
what's better for you or what's better for the United States may not be what Australia wants. Australia is the buyer.
Right.
Get to buy whatever sub they want. And
well, we don't know what pressure the U.S. put on this for their own reasons. We don't know.
What I mean, put it this way: Australia has, in recent years, shown an ability to withstand, at least on certain occasions, U.S. pressure. And second of all, if it was U.S., I mean, Australia is the one in the most precarious position as far as China goes, as far as proximity goes. So I would say that if it has to do with hedging against China, then Australia and the United States may be on the same page as far as that goes. Australia even more so. But I mean, I have no.
I mean, definitely. Also, this was done in a bad way to the French. I mean, we shouldn't have done it the way we did it either.
If you want me to speak, I'll speak.
Okay.
If you want to speak on your own show, let me know because I got other things to do. The fact is that the point I was going to make is that France can. I'm very fond of France and everything like that, and I'm sure there's all types of pressure. But fundamentally, it comes down to Australia's decision. They're the buyer. They're paying for it one way or the other, and they're going to make the choice. So maybe it's a matter of the best sub. Maybe it's a matter of pressure being brought on. Maybe there's other economic considerations. But it is Australia's choice. Neither France nor the United States has a right to ram anything down its throat, especially a submarine. So I'm under the impression there is the caveat, caveat emptor, buyer beware. But the fact is, it is Australia's choice, and Australia gets to make their choice that's best, that they feel is best for them. And if the people of Australia don't like the choice that the government makes, then their job is to get rid of that government in the next election.
Right. In fact, again, new elections are coming up, and a lot of people think the current government under Morrison, the conservative government, is likely to lose that election. I don't know if that could result in this thing being blown up, or the new government choosing. I guess it would be the Liberals, right? If probably would win that, if not the Conservatives. So, but I'm sure Jim has some.
We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
Well, let's hear what Dennis has to say.
Okay. Dennis, what do you think about all these military maneuverings, and if you have a thought, or Ken, Dennis doesn't want to chime in.
All I can say is sacrament.
All right, let me get into it. First of all, you have very strong anti-nuclear movements inside both Australia and New Zealand, particularly New Zealand. So it's hard to say how they're going to react to this. Now, on the other hand, you've had this battle going on between Australia and China, where China basically has said to the Australians, you guys mess with us, we're going to screw you up economically. So there's a reaction inside Australia. Certainly it led to Morrison being elected, to that kind of pressure. And we know that they have the power to do that because the two largest sources of export from Australia go to China. So that's sort of a political 2x4 that China has to deploy against the Australians. Now, the Australians have been talking about replacing these submarines for a long time. This has been going on for 20 years. They have what they call 6 Collins-class submarines that they themselves built. They're diesel submarines. And they've gone through different kinds of permutations. They're probably going to refit them and reorganize them for, make them more efficient diesel attack submarines. Now, the negotiations with the French were to buy 12 Barracuda class submarines. Now, the Barracuda class is usually a nuclear attack submarine. It's a French produced nuclear attack submarine. What they were getting was a diesel Barracuda type class. And so what's occurred in the past couple of years is that, this is where you got to, take seriously how different countries will react to changes in the local naval balance. They are, they're watching the Chinese, the People's Liberation Navy build itself up. They're watching the sort of aggressive kind of expansion of the first and second and third zones as the Chinese defined them in the 80s take shape in the oceans around China, and especially in the areas that have an effect on Australia, that is the Straits of Malacca and all the different islands that in the previous situations, when you read about Australian defense policy, they always considered a forward defense into the islands, the Dutch East Indies in World War II. It was, defend New Guinea, defend the islands in the Solomons up to Rabaul, etc. That's how they defended themselves. And now, of course, it's a whole different situation. So they feel that they need a nuclear attack submarine. And so they were pretty much, they'd actually started to shift production into Adelaide, which is where they were going to build these subs. They mainly were going to be built in Australia itself. And that's when you had the shift occur to adopt a attack nuclear submarine that was to be coordinated with the British and the Americans. And clearly it's interesting. It follows on the heels of the defeat in Afghanistan, because, some argue, I don't have to tell you, people have been reading these kind of reports that they argue that, the reason why, it's good for Biden and bad for China and Russia is that now they can, focus in all their energy on the conflict with China and Russia instead of having this diversion of resources into Afghanistan. I mean, I read this ridiculous lefty argument that the reason why we were in Afghanistan was to maintain bases in Central Asia to threaten China and Russia and Iran. Now, that might have been true if the government hadn't collapsed, but the argument was essentially, it was an interesting argument, sophisticated argument, but I rejected it. So that's where they're sort of focusing.
Who was saying this, Jim?
This is an article in the LA Progressive. It was an interesting article. The guy it was a smart argument, but it was an interesting argument, but I don't necessarily buy it. But because I don't really see that much that was gained. The whole question would have been if the government had been stable. And that's, of course, going to be a huge domestic issue in the United States in the next couple of weeks, particularly when they get on Capitol Hill and the Republicans start having their fun times when they try to do a Benghazi of Afghanistan. But that's the question with these submarines. So you have to, as you know, as I don't have to tell Michael and Alex, and certainly Ken and Dennis, they're seeing these deployments of these attack submarines in the wider context of deterrence and possible use in combat against China. And that's where this whole decision should be made. And that's where it might politically lead to a change in government in Australia, but the Morrison toppled.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing is the way I was doing them, that basically only at the distance to, like, say, the Taiwan Straits, you can only deploy about 1 in 3 of the subs you have at that or like the Straits of Malacca. So this one guy was arguing basically, well, if you have 6 subs, that means you can deploy 2 subs at one time. If you have 9 subs, that means you can deploy 3, and was kind of arguing, well, that's not really much of an addition to like the naval balance, just 2 or 3 subs, even if they're, pretty good nuclear, attack subs. and that basically on the Chinese side, since they're operating in home waters, they can easily, and their subs are going to be cheaper. They can easily, add 10 subs that, and they can maybe 1 and 2 of their subs can operate at that same distance. So
Well, the
that kind of
problem,
arguing that, well, they can outproduce us regardless,
all right, the
essentially.
problem with that argument is we have no idea about the relative combat effectiveness of the
Sure,
different
of course, yeah.
surface and submarine elements of the PLA versus the United States Navy, et cetera. We really don't know that. We don't know what the real calculations are.
Yeah.
So that's where the whole problem of the balance gets all screwed up, because you don't know what the Americans think. We don't know what they think bringing into their war games, because we know, like, for example, we all participated, in somebody who had just designed a war game for the Pentagon on this very topic, and it was a classified war game. So we don't know what the actual calculations are, because thank God we haven't had a war. So, that's to be avoided. And that's where I think you're going to have domestic reactions against these decisions inside Australia.
Right.
I wanted to make a comment on that. I was just watching some information about new class of aircraft carriers that take the vertical lift airplanes. It's like a mini aircraft carrier, but it can carry as many planes.
Probably one of the Marine.
VTOL takeoffs. But it's they were going over the factor that it's nuclear as opposed to diesel, because if it's diesel, it's very complicated to refuel it. You have to refuel it on the high seas. And, every time you come into port, you're taking a chance. So that's going to be more true with the submarines. The submarine can go for 6 years, most likely, or 10 years without refueling.
Right.
With the nuclear power.
They can deploy for about 80 or 90 days, because it's, they're limited by how much food they can basically take on board.
Yeah,
and
but
also you don't want someone out there 6 months is going to probably, flip
they
out.
can but strategically,
in a steel tube,
it's strategically you can deliver food by airdrops or other means. When you want to come up to
not
refuel,
if you want to hide where they are, though, Ken.
if you want to, I understand. But if you want to, I disagree that they could only go out for 6 months. It depends on the crew size and everything.
Well, look,
but the issue is, it's very difficult to refuel a ship at sea. And, you'd have to send out a tanker and so forth. Even if it was limited to 6 months, they can pick up those supplies. Yes, they'd maybe have to come into port or get them from a ship, but they can be much more Fabian and undetectable. They don't have to hang around Australia. They could be out somewhere for a long time. Diesel ships, much more dependent upon maintenance and fuel delivery. So I think that's one of the reasons that they might be wanting to move to nuclear, that it goes into their strategy. We'll have some subs that don't have to, they can be more secretive, stay out longer.
Well, they're actually talking about lending them refurbished Los Angeles class subs. And that would give.
I thought they were going to go for like a mini Virginia class or a smaller Virginia.
Well, that's one option, to have an exclusively Virginia class attack submarine fleet. But the problem with that issue with nuclear deterrence is that you can always give them a modified nuclear, like, sort of Tomahawk type weapon that they can then have a nuclear capability. And also they want to obviously make them modularized for U.S. support purposes, because in case of having to sustain them, they want to have a submarine that's essentially easily fixed by American logistical means, which is why they want a sub like that. But anyway, this is going to be a big political issue. Look at someone who's that great woman, that woman who leads the attack on nuclear weapons in Australia. That famous woman.
I can't.
You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
The doctor.
The other interesting thing I was noticing is there's a whole issue like, are they going to build them in the U.S.? Is because Australia doesn't have a nuclear shipbuilding capability, so are they going to develop?
No, they were developing that in Adelaide. They were developing it.
Oh, they are? Okay.
In Adelaide for the French. So the question,
Australian anti-nuclear activists.
It's a good question. Who that famous woman? She used to be on Pacifica. I've
Just wanted to look it up. Helen Caldicott.
Helen Caldicott, correct. And Helen Caldicott, her whole call to arms was over watching On the Beach.
Right.
The movie
Which
by
is set
Neville
in
Fish.
Australia, of course.
That's right. She was an Australian young woman, watched it, got very scared, and got scared forever about nuclear weapons. So watch what goes on down there. There's going to be a lot of people wanting to have a reasonable, sane
And
policy
that's an
with China.
example of, for a movie show, of a movie having actual political impact, starting a nuclear movement or connected to it.
That's the dystopian film that we left out.
Right.
However, which was a major motion picture, which was based on a best-selling book by, his pen name was Neville Shute.
Right.
He was a very popular Australian author, but was Australian. So the fact that the movie took place in Australia, although ironically,
No, I think didn't the guy who wrote On the Beach was an American?
No,
Edward Beach. I thought
he
it was
was
Edward Beach.
he was actually born in England, I believe, and he was
Australian.
But however, that's Neville Shute. He also wrote the book Town Like Alice, whatever, Town Called Alice. He was an Australian, a very Australian writer. But the irony of the On the Beach, both the film and the book, is that in that book, which of course was dealing with nuclear war in a 1950s level nuclear war, what it would be, the last surviving place on Earth was Australia.
Right.
Right.
So it would take the longest for fallout to reach it.
Right, the last place, which of course it eventually did. But so the fact that the Australians were worried, but I guess it did hit it. And
if you looked at Ken's list, you'll see also Threads is one of the other dystopian movies that, the one about, a post-nuclear war England.
Right. But the idea is, at that time, what they were worried about was fallout. Of course, the nuclear.
Now we know about nuclear winter would be a more immediate issue. Yeah.
It's actually not just. In other words, we didn't have the thermonuclear capabilities that we do today. We also didn't have the number of nuclear weapons.
Well, actually, we did. But the novel was based. The novel was based on radioactive clouds from China.
Right.
Hitting Australia.
They were worried about fallout. That was what they thought was going to destroy the world from a nuclear war. Now we've gotten to the point, well, at least during the height of the mad times, we got to the point where we could destroy the world 7 times over. So in that sense, the scenario of On the Beach is a little antiquated. But you're right that it did alert a lot of people in Australia and New Zealand, and particularly Helen Caldicott, to start an anti-nuclear movement. The problem is that even if Australia had ordered non-nuclear subs, they still would have had the capacity to fire nuclear warheads.
Yeah.
So just having a non-nuclear sub.
The argument is that if you have highly enriched uranium, you can just go to nuclear weapons like that.
Australia can always get nuclear weapons, and there's no danger about should Australia get involved in Afghanistan.
Again, the issue, as I said, is that also it's a potential example.
Alex, wait till the end of a sentence for you. I'm sorry to interrupt the front of your sentence with the middle of mine. What I'm trying to say is there's very little danger in an Afghanistan situation of Australia or any other country leaving behind a nuclear sub. Yes. So the fact of the matter is, that's not the problem, whether or not the subs are nuclear or not. The problem is whether or not they're going to be armed with nuclear weapons.
Well, they are. They're going to buy Tomahawks.
Right. And I think that if they were diesel subs, they would still be armed with nuclear weapons. So that is the problem that Helen Caldicott and everybody should be dealing with at this point.
Okay, hey, I'd suggest we move to the next topic. How many you got left, Alex? What do you got?
one short, one and one longer. So this is again, it's kind of more again on what's going on in China with this Evergrande real estate company that's on the verge of bankruptcy. So this is from a few days ago. But, it hasn't declared bankruptcy yet. But this is interesting. This could be another financial crisis around the world.
But we haven't had a follow up on it yet. We don't know what the CCP is going to do.
They haven't yet declared bankruptcy or anything like that. So, but it's almost certainly going to happen.
Begin in China, where embattled real estate giant Evergrande faces a major moment of truth this week. The company owes an estimated $300 billion and is expected to default on bond payments, some of which are due this Monday, with more coming on Thursday. Evergrande operates and develops 1,300 real estate projects across China and employs 200,000 people. The company financed its breakneck expansion with credit and bond issues. The pandemic has paralyzed its operations. Its debt equates to 2% of Chinese gross domestic product. Evergrande was always thought to be too big to fail. Now, where have we heard that one before? If it topples, it could take a number of banks down with it, like Lehman Brothers did in 2008. The risk of defaulting has prompted a sell-off. Evergrande stocks have lost 80% of their value since the start of the year.
Family homes of the future, or the bleak monuments to a spectacular business failure. These residential buildings in the city of Luoyang may never be finished. Construction had been moving slowly already. Reports of the impending crisis around Evergrande's gargantuan debt pile brought it to a complete halt. Those who bought apartments here for their families are worried that they will now never be completed. We've been here 3 times and saw that the construction site and the tower crane have not moved. So we came over to ask, and they told us that we had to wait for news. Are you worried when you see negative news about Evergrande? I'm worried. We all bought it ourselves with our hard-earned money. There are unfinished Evergrande projects across China. The company owes at least $300 billion. The crisis is causing panic in Beijing, with fears that a collapse could wreak havoc on the country's financial system. At the Evergrande Oasis property showrooms in Luoyang, the lights showcasing dazzling displays of ambitious property developments are still flashing, but the mood among Evergrande employees is disconsolate. Now we have a lot of layoffs here, and they worry that their wages will not be paid. Although the bosses have said before that layoffs do not affect wages, it's a question of how much time before they get paid after being laid off. Luoyang is known as one of China's 4 historic capitals, but today it is at the center of a very modern Chinese tragedy.
Now, for more, I am joined at the table by our resident China expert, Clifford Coonan. I'm almost there, Clifford, just wait. Welcome. Clifford, you know what I want to ask, the big question, is Evergrande going to default?
I think at this stage it's looking very likely. I think now what we're looking at is what form that default will take, whether it'll be a wide-scale default or whether it'll be a sort of a much more managed approach to things. I think the key word here in this whole Evergrande story is contagion. What everyone's worrying about is whether Evergrande's situation will spill over into other areas of the real estate sector, which accounts for 15 to 20% of Chinese GDP, which is a huge amount, and whether that in turn then will spill over into the broader Chinese economy and cause much more serious problems.
So we have to see whether the sickness will spread as such. But Evergrande has sought to compensate investors with real estate. What do you make of that plan?
There is a kind of a whack-a-mole element about this, that if you start giving people real estate to pay for debt, that ultimately you're just kind of masking a problem rather than addressing a problem, which is actually just paying back interest rates. And what we're possibly looking at is a kind of a credit crunch situation where it becomes very difficult to borrow money. And I think that's what everyone is particularly worried about. They also have promised to build 1.4 million homes. That's still outstanding. That's with small investors. You have 170 or so domestic banks, around 120 foreign banks who owed money. So you've got a huge spread in terms of how Evergrande's debt situation is working. And so I think by also by creating supply, by giving out property as a way of paying it back, it just exacerbates the problem in the sector as well, and could indeed lead to contagion.
Well, whack-a-mole is a notoriously difficult game, but this has, of course, been described as a potential Lehman Brothers moment. Is Beijing expected to step in and bail Evergrande out?
Yeah, I think the Lehman Brothers comparisons are interesting. I mean, they owed about 613 billion when they collapsed in 2008, and then we're looking at 300 billion here. So Lehman Brothers was bigger. But the problem here, I think, is that we may be just looking at the tip of the iceberg. We don't know exactly really how much is owed in the overall sector and the spillover effect within China. We've been saying for many years that China's real estate market is over leveraged, that if there was ever going to be a problem in the Chinese economy, it was going to happen in the real estate sector. And I think this is the biggest challenge that we've seen since the Lehman Brothers situation. Whether the government will intervene, I don't think the government will intervene directly, because we're actually, at the moment, the political climate is kind of pushing back against the tycoons. There was, a few years ago, Evergrande bought a football team with Jack Ma, and they went on to win the Asian Champions Leagues, but those heady days of where the tycoons ran everything are over. And now I think what we're probably more looking at is maybe some kind of managed bailout, but that could also be nationalization. They may even allow Evergrande to fall and then use that as a way to nationalize the industry.
Certainly a lot of public anger there as well. Clifford Hoonan, thank you very much.
All right, so obviously that's going to be a significant crisis in the Chinese economy, and it's going to be interesting to see how they choose to deal with this again. For sure, I have everything from a bailout to letting Evergrande fail to a nationalization. So yeah,
Alex,
Dennis, what are your thoughts? Yeah, no, go on, Dennis.
Oh yeah, what I wanted to say was I read something about the Chinese real estate problem. It is confined to the capitalist sector. The rest of the economy is okay. So what's happening is that with the Chinese, that the capitalist sector is getting to be a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really good news, I would say.
Mm.
Because what they're going to do is shift to state-owned enterprises, and that's going to be. I look forward to seeing China move towards socialism. That's what I would say.
Okay.
And the other thing I would say is about the Australia thing with China.
Okay.
The United States cannot win a war against China. China's 1.4 billion people. There's no way we can defeat them. We might be able to destroy them completely, but we can't beat them in a war.
Mm.
That's I just leave it at that.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm sure some people may have other thoughts, disagreeing with you, Dennis, there. But so Ken, do you want to?
Well, that's what's wrong with our what do you call it again? Our strategic planners. They're I would say they're nuts. They're megalomaniacs.
Right,
that's what I would say.
All right. So Ken.
Now, I don't see why the government wouldn't intercede. However, whatever formula they want to use, I think that's what happens in a capitalist system. If a property goes to default, you don't pay property tax, or your company goes bankrupt, somebody buys it or winds up in the hands of the government. The banks and so forth and so on. The banks, the property, everything's backed by the government. That's where you get security. So they don't have to, they're going to do it. They're going to handle it. Why would they suffer industry collapse? And like we talked about yesterday, have all those ghost cities. And it's because part of what's driving the surge in real estate in China is the increase in assets of the middle class. So they want to invest in something. So China says, well, let's build a city that looks like Paris. And, we'll build it over here. Let's build another one that looks like Moscow over here.
Right.
And, people can buy, it was on 60 Minutes. People can buy condos there before they're built, and after they're built, they could stay there for years. But it's an investment.
Sure.
And
if
this was pointed out to me. At any point in time, China has the ability to say, take 100,000 or 200,000 people from Shanghai and just move them to Paris, or take 500,000 people and move them to the new Moscow. You're going to live here, as we say so. They can do that, and it's not in a malicious criminal sense, because they have incredible infrastructure and they have the cooperation of the public. It is a very cohesive society. Everybody's part of the same hive. They cooperate. Just as a little
They
anecdote,
trust their government, unlike ours.
well, they work with each other. If you walk through the subways in a Chinese, in a big city like Beijing or Shanghai, everybody's sitting there politely looking at their phone. Nobody's going car to car singing songs. Nobody's like pushing with knees and elbows. It's very coordinated. It's a quality of like when you see in a football game, those cards and everybody's moving in unison.
Right.
They're very cohesive. So if they're necessary to relocate, they will. And so why would the CCP have this blemish, which would then if it affects the market, it affects international trade, everything starts picking up.
Yeah.
Just solve it. It's only $300 billion. That's not a lot of money. What is that in terms of their GDP? 0.25%? It's nothing.
Right. Yeah. If you read any book on the 2007-8 crisis, or Adam Tooze's book on it, they'll admit basically China essentially saved the world economy, in part by building a lot of real estate as a way to keep their economy going and then fuel the rest of the world. So it'll be interesting. Well, obviously, I'm not going to be able to get him, but I would wonder what Adam would think about this. So maybe Jim, I'm sure you have some thoughts yourself.
Well,
let me
put the finish on the sub issue. They're talking about 10 Virginia attack class submarines, and the reason they want them is that they have a loiter rate. By loiter rate, I mean to the uninformed, there, basically how many days they're going to stay on station. The diesel subs have 11 days on station. The nuclear subs have 77 days. So right there, you see a big difference. Now, the issue of this, I agree. Look, there was a really interesting piece in the Times last week about how Xi Jinping is essentially talking about implementing a redistribution policy.
Yeah, we were talking about that.
It was very interesting. It was a very interesting piece. And I cannot see the Chinese government allowing a huge property like this. I mean, they own 1,300 properties in China. They manage 2,800 real estate projects. They are responsible for 3.8 million jobs indirectly each year. They employ 200,000 people. I find it hard to believe that. And then, you saw that piece. Some guy had invested his money in a house, in an apartment. So I can't see them allowing, like in a free market crash. I mean, they're not far right, laissez-faire, Adam Smith Republican maniacs. Right. So I find it hard to believe that they would allow a hit like that on their economy to occur. And also, given the fact that they're trying to show that they're more responsible in the United States, et cetera, et cetera. But who knows? But I just can't see them allowing it to collapse. It doesn't make sense to me, because it would have an international effect, and it would have a negative effect politically on how people perceive China. So I find it difficult to not think that they're going to intervene.
It would be negative internally too. All the people who would lose.
Well,
investors,
It's something. You talk about Tiananmen Square. It's something. Like you remember the great fantasy of a certain percentage of people in the foreign policy establishment, in the government is like, oh, when are the Chinese going to rebel and overthrow the government and put in a democracy? And so this, of course, would factor into those kind of people's thinking that, the Chinese made a big miscalculation. They allowed a $300 billion debt. So, and yes, I agree with Dennis, the issue of how the money's invested. It's not tied up in the banks the way the Lehman Brothers mess was. The Lehman Brothers mess, as we know, percolated throughout the entire economy. And even if you go back to the savings and loans crisis in the late 80s, the same kind of stuff happened with that. So that had interlocking impacts on all different aspects of the economy. And I don't think this is the same situation.
No. All right. Well, Mike, do you have anything to contribute? Otherwise, we'll go on to the last. But yeah, I think you want to say something.
First of all, yeah, China, unlike the United States, does has the option to nationalize if they have to. So I don't think that's. I agree with Jim. It's not going to go nearly as far. And I do agree it won't. In other words, that China can step in. There are things that they can do about it. Because they have, at worst, a hybrid system right now. But one little thing about the idea about not winning, be able to defeat China in a war, it's generally accepted. I think it's probably still generally accepted that you can't win a land war, a conventional land war, with China, in China, in Asia, but on the continent. And hopefully conventional is the only type of war that anybody is postulating about, if they have to fight any war at all.
Yeah.
But a war, for instance, if China were to invade Taiwan, for instance, it would be a different ballgame. And I'm sure that's consideration in China's minds. So, they're probably protected against any attempt to, wipe them off the face of the earth, other than with nuclear weapons. Again, let's hope that nobody's even considering that. But as far as a more limited conventional war in which they are operating outside of the mainland, that's probably a different ballgame.
Okay, well, last little clip again. I mentioned this yesterday. This is, one of these involved inside story pieces from Al Jazeera. There's a recent story about the real guy. Oh, I'm blanking on his name. They'll mention it pretty quickly. The real guy in the movie Hotel Rwanda, who's now been arrested by the Kagame regime in Rwanda. And of course, this has generated a bit of a cause célèbre internationally. We'll hear again. They have a government spokesperson that pretty much says, "Oh, he's a terrorist." That's the accusation. He's been sentenced to a 25-year sentence. So, and of course, again, we'll see one of the other people that they have as a panelist has some technical difficulties. So it's mostly this guy who's a defender of it's like Paul Kusagabe or something. But, well, again, I'm sure we'll have our thoughts. I mean, just personally, I'll say from other things I've heard about the Kagame regime, he's pretty much a right-wing dictator. And this looks like, again, a show trial. But here, let's play the 10 or so minutes of the piece, and then we can discuss it to finish the show.
The hero of the Rwandan genocide, Paul Rusesabagina, will now spend the next 25 years what led to the verdict, and did his criticism of the president play a role? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Imran Khan. For many, Paul Rusesabagina is a hero. The former hotel manager saved the lives of more than 1,200 people by giving them shelter during the 1994 Rwandan genocide. The story was celebrated in the Hollywood film Hotel Rwanda. Since then, Rusesabagina has become one of the most vocal critics of President Paul Kagame. The government has accused him of being part of an armed group. He's been convicted and jailed for 25 years for terrorism. Rights groups and observers say the trial was a sham. designed to send a message to dissidents. Malcolm Webb reports from Rwanda's capital, Kigali.
Get an ad.
There's a 90% chance your phone is already infected with this. There's a new groundbreaking discovery.
Okay.
Paul Rusesabagina refused to come to court with his co-accused to hear the verdict of his trial in Rwanda's capital, Kigali. He was charged with terrorism and related offences. Prosecutors said he was behind a series of attacks that happened in Rwanda 3 years ago.
With regard to Rusesabagina, Paul, he is convicted of being a member of an illegal group and participating in terror activities, but he is acquitted of creating an illegal armed group. Therefore, Rusesabagina Paul is sentenced to 25 years imprisonment.
Rusesabagina was flown from Dubai to Kigali last year against his will. Rwanda's government suggested he was deceived into boarding a plane that it paid for. International legal observers say that was just the first of many problems with the trial. His family has rejected the verdict.
My father was tortured, kidnapped, denied his basic rights, and then now they just gave him a guilty verdict. The co-accused came on the stand and said that they had been forced and coerced and tortured into saying false things against my father, and the witnesses are paid government agents.
Rusesabagina was made famous by the Hollywood film Hotel Rwanda. He told the story of how he saved hundreds of lives as a hotel manager during Rwanda's 1994 genocide. He then fled into exile and became a vocal critic of Rwanda's President Paul Kagame. He pledged support for an opposition armed group. Prosecutors said he also funded it and ordered attacks. Rusesabagina denied it. Most of his co-accused pled guilty, and their statements were used as evidence against him. The other defendants are now being led onto the prison bus to be taken back to jail. Rusesabagina hasn't even left jail for the last 6 months because he's refused to participate in the court proceedings. All of the defendants now have the opportunity to appeal at the Court of Appeal within the next 15 days. Rusesabagina and his supporters have completely rejected all of these legal proceedings to date. Rusesabagina is a Belgian citizen and a resident of the US. Both governments have criticised the trial. Rwanda's government says justice has been delivered. If he serves the 25-year sentence, Rusesabagina, who's 67 years old, will likely die in jail. Malcolm Webb, Al Jazeera, Kigali, Rwanda.
President Paul Kagame is a polarizing figure in Rwanda. He's credited with developing the country and its political stability after the genocide. But he's accused of silencing opponents. South Africa's investigators said Kagame's government was directly involved in the killing of one of his critics, Patrick Karegeya, in Johannesburg in 2014. Kigali has denied the accusations and any involvement in the unsolved murders of several Rwandan dissidents. Now, the most recent was the death of a former army officer who was shot at his home in Mozambique's capital, Maputo, last week. Let's bring in our guests. In Kigali, Yolande Makolo, a Rwandan government spokesperson, and in Chicago, Brian Endless, Director of African Studies at Loyola University Chicago and Senior Advisor to the Hotel Rwanda Rusesabagina Foundation. And in London, Jonathan Ofe-Ansah, publisher of Africa Briefing, a Pan-African news magazine based in London. Now, welcome to the program. I'd like to begin with Brian Endless in Chicago. This was nothing more than a sham trial.
Thank you for having me on the program, and unfortunately, I completely agree. Paul Rusesabagina was kidnapped by the Rwandan government over a year ago, last August. He was not kidnapped because of any criminal charges. He was taken because he has been a critic of that government for over 20 years now, and they have harassed him over that time. European parliamentarians said, what fair trial process starts with a kidnapping? And following the kidnapping, he was tortured for 4 days. He was held in solitary confinement for over 250 days in violation of the UN's Nelson Mandela rules for treatment of prisoners. And he has had limited or no access to his lawyers or legal documents. There was no fair trial ever intended in this case. And as we clearly see from the proceedings and from the results, no fair trial happened.
In Kigali, Yolande Makolo, this was just justice being served, wasn't it?
Absolutely. The trial of these 21 FLN suspects was conducted fairly and transparently, and the evidence that was presented to the court was compelling and comprehensive. Part of the evidence that was presented to the court consisted of files that were handed over to the Rwandan prosecution from the Belgian prosecution that searched Rusesabagina's house in Brussels. Also presented in court was the testimony of his co-accused, who talked about what they had done together, as well as victim testimonies, victims of the attacks in 2018 and 2019 in southwestern Rwanda.
Brian Endless, it was fair, it was transparent, the evidence was presented in the way it should have been.
Yeah, boy.
Why are you complaining?
Okay.
Let me take it point by point, and thank you for bringing it up, and that is the classic answer of the Rwandan government. The good news for us was it was transparent. This trial was very transparent. It was broadcast on YouTube every day, and we were able to watch it with Paul's family and Paul's legal team, and we saw the unfairness unfold before our eyes. There was no compelling testimony. In fact, there was no reasonable testimony in any way, shape, or form. There was nothing presented that showed that Paul or any of the co-accused were guilty. The spokesperson mentioned the so-called Belgian dossier. There was, in fact, a dossier that came from Belgium. It was an investigation that started at the request of the Rwandan government in 2019. The Belgian government cooperated with them. They put together a long document. Unfortunately for the Rwandan government, they want us to believe this document is in some way going to indict Paul. In fact, we've read the document, and there is nothing in it. There is nothing to the point that in July, the Belgian government began talking with Paul's local lawyer to tell him that they were about to close the case and nothing was going to happen. There was no evidence found there that in any way could be used to indict Paul. The testimony of the co-accused, and there was actually a written testimony from Paul too. Paul began this in person after person, talked about their testimony when they came up on the stand, and they said it was coerced. In Paul's case, it was coerced at the end of 4 days of torture with no lawyer present. He was forced to sign a document. At least one of the co-accused said in court that he signed a document he had not even read. His lawyer presented him with the document. Most of the co-accused talked about the coercion that went into their written testimony, and their verbal testimony, on the other hand, in open court, transparently, completely vindicated Paul and the others. They said there was no connection to Paul. They didn't know him. They didn't know of the political party that Paul is a part of until they went to jail. And then finally, because the spokesperson brought it up, the victim's testimony was not testimony at all. We watched victim after victim, and I'm very sorry for these victims and their families. We watched victim after victim come up, and they told us what they had lost. They gave us a story of troops that were unidentified that had attacked them and or attacked their loved ones. They told us what property they had lost or the injuries they had had. They never identified these troops. They never identified any of the co-accused. They never said that any of these troops were a part of the group that the Rwandan government alleges committed these attacks. In fact, over the entire trial from February to July, zero evidence was presented that these attacks even happened. There were pictures of some attack. There were witnesses talking about some attack. It was only the prosecutors telling us these attacks happened. They
Well,
presented no
Brian,
proof.
let's put all of that to Yolanda McCullough. What is your reaction?
Well, in addition to numerous records of WhatsApp conversation between the members who are planning the attacks in Rwanda and also planning how to take responsibility for them, there was evidence of Western Union, another institution of funds to the DRC to buy weapons and supplies. There were conversations about the needs of the soldiers on the ground. There were conversations as well about Rusesabagina getting military updates from the ground, from the commanders in the ground. He was clearly in charge of this militia. He was promoting the officers. He was deciding who the spokespeople would be. In addition, while all this was happening, they were not quiet about this. They're still online on VOA and BBC Radio, conversations that Rusesabagina had with journalists, bragging about the attacks and taking responsibility for them.
Having a conversation with a journalist is not a crime. That is not a crime. That is not a crime. Having a conversation with a journalist is not a crime. Having a conversation on WhatsApp privately is not evidence of conspiracy.
Taking responsibility for attacks where people died is a crime. And he was found guilty based on the evidence that was presented in court.
Jonathan, a fair answer. You've been hearing what our two guests in Kigali and Chicago have been saying. Clearly, this is a very controversial trial with very controversial themes, like having conversations with journalists. I mean, how much of the African imagination has this caught?
How do you know your soap actually stops the stink? Try the butt suds test. Suds up, wash that butt crack.
The trial has been controversial indeed, yes. But from where I'm sitting as an observer, a journalist and an observer, I believe that Paul Rusesabagina, it's on record. We all saw it on TV. Al Jazeera broadcast it on TV. That the Kagame regime must be removed by all means necessary. Okay, I mean, so he set himself up openly as an opponent of Paul Kagame. Okay, and from what we gather, report that we gather, I mean, there were some bombings, in certain villages, in which he was implicated. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a legal expert, I'm just a journalist observing things. And from what we see, I wouldn't say, I could neither agree that the trial was free and fair or the trial was unfair. Okay, but
sorry, Jonathan, you're cracking up there. We're going to come back to you shortly, but I do want to put your point to Yolanda Makolo.
Okay, so again, they go on more with this. Was pretty much, bring up the same issues. Yeah, so the issue, is this guy a terrorist, as the Rwandan government says, or is he, a dissident being unfairly, persecuted in a show trial? So again, just because other things I've read about Paul Kagame and his regime, and also the fact that his role in the genocide isn't so nice either, and then in fact, his Rwandan I think it's the Rwandan Patriotic Front, also massacred, well, not just tens of thousands, but hundreds of thousands on their side, so that there's not, the Rwandan genocide was not basically one-sided. But again, of course, I don't, beyond what they're saying here, I don't know about all this evidence, so that he's supporting this terror, this I guess we'd say insurgent group against the government, or obviously you could call it terrorists. So, again, I'd have to look more into that, but it seems to me again that this is, authoritarian regime that he's fighting against. So I tend to be more on his side, but yeah, I'm sure others might have a different opinion. And I know, Jim, you probably have some knowledge of Rwanda and Kagame and the whole history around this.
Yeah, well, Paul Kagame is an interesting figure because he goes back to the period when he was being nurtured by Julius Nyerere in Tanzania. And people forget that Paul Kagame was part of the effort to overthrow Idi Amin when they put Museveni into power in Uganda. And then that's when they used as a base Uganda to intervene in the Rwanda genocide, with the Rwanda Patriotic Front. Now, the Rwanda Patriotic Front militarily is looked on as one of the best in terms of the military basis for a national army. It's looked on as one of the best national armies in Africa. His son went to West Point. Kagame's son went to West Point. And Kagame was always very savvy politically. When the overthrow of Mobutu occurred in Zaire, Kagame was part of the whole big, oh boy, there's a
intervention.
Jackpot.
Yeah.
Well, they just put up a jackpot for $500 million for Powerball. Oh well. Anyway, so Kagame was part of the whole operation that was set in motion to put Laurent Kabila into power. And that included Zimbabwe, and that included all these different countries. But the problem, of course, was these countries were going in with their own political objectives and particularly material objectives when they intervened in the Congo. So they took control. Zimbabwe, for example, intervened into the area of Shaba, which is the old Katanga area. And they basically, quite consciously, took control of diamond production, for example. And Kagame was part of that. So Kagame is someone who has fostered a lot of opposition. He regionally and transnationally throughout Africa goes after his critics. He'll go and assassinate people who oppose him. He's done it in Maputo and Mozambique, as they mentioned in that piece. And the case of this guy, okay, it's an interesting question what the United States is going to do, because he has a green card. And he also is a Belgian
citizen, yeah.
Right. And, you know, Cheadle played him, did a great job in Hotel Rwanda. So the question is going to be how the Biden administration acts, because Rwanda is an ally militarily of the United States in Africa.
Yeah.
And they're a very important part of Africa Command. They're an effective part of Africa Command. And so the question is going to be how they balance that all out with his desire to maintain political control ruthlessly. Now, I'm not familiar with what this
case
is associated with the Democratic Front and what that's all about. And you know, she could be right. I don't know. I'd have to investigate that more in terms of figuring out what's going on. But Kagame is one of the most clever political leaders in Africa that has been very astute in working the odds with the United States. So keep that in mind when we deal with someone like Kagame.
All right. So, Dennis, do you have any thoughts? In terms of, well, obviously this has some implications for imperialism here. Again, you know, like Jim said, Kagame has been a good loyal ally of the U.S. here in Africa, and is
but you gotta sort of say, here's a guy who's a Maoist in his youth, right?
Oh, really? Okay.
Oh yeah. Like, see, you know, like people, like he was a big follower of Mao's. He was trained in in China. He was trained in China, and he participated in the camps where Frelimo was being trained in Mozambique and Tanzania. Excuse me.
Okay,
Tanzania.
yeah. So he's like, I remember reading about in Rhodesia, there was a pro-Soviet insurgent group. I forget their names now. And then there was a pro-Chinese.
The
So
Zimbabwe African People's Union was pro-Soviet, and the Zimbabwe African National Union was Mugabe. But you can't oversimplify it. It's it's Africa is quite complicated, and you know, the issue of what Kagame's doing. You know, he's attacked by Human Rights Watch. You know, he's a merciless dictator. And so what we're seeing here is an interesting international case. We'll have to see how this plays out internationally in terms of public opinion.
Yeah. All right, Ken, or
I didn't follow something that was reported. Was he kidnapped or was he?
No, he was tricked into flying from Dubai to Rwanda. and
Right.
arrested essentially when
Okay.
he was in Dubai.
And okay, so I mean, to me,
It wasn't
that
quite a rendition. He was more tricked into getting on a plane, essentially.
I mean, big discussion is, for the majority of the public, including myself, is what I did a little bit of research on the history of the Hutus and the Tutsis, because I know it just didn't happen overnight,
Oh.
So there's a big, long historical.
And a lot of people think Kagame essentially he was behind the assassination of the Rwandan leader that sparked the genocide.
Right.
And so he eventually touched, whether he thought that was going to lead to a genocide is another thing, but he kind of touched it off by, assassinate. They shot down the guy's plane with.
I know, but whenever this news breaks, there's always a history behind it. Who backed what, what's the big long-term thing where you could light a spark to a fire where people go out in the street with machetes and start killing their neighbors. It doesn't happen overnight. So, but of course, that whole video was interesting in terms of the decor that the costumes that the prisoners
it
are
was
wearing.
interesting the position that Al Jazeera guy was clearly again taking the anti-Rwandan, just saying accusing them, you're criminalizing journalism.
Right.
Why is it bad to talk to a journalist?
I mean, those very fashionable pink prison suits. That was shocking pink. Very interesting. So why don't we bring this to a conclusion, because some of us want to go have dinner.
Okay. Well, Mike hasn't talked yet, so let's.
Mike.
Give him a minute. Yeah.
And I have to.
Hey, Mike.
We have the point I wanted to make is that, first of all, I'm very skeptical about anybody who's convicted only on witness testimony, and that's all it seems like he was convicted on. They presented no hard evidence. From what I've heard, I didn't see the whole trial, obviously. They had no hard evidence against him. So I think that this trial was a sham. And I imagine the reason he's not appealing it is because he doesn't think he's going to get a fair trial in the appeal. So I guess both the countries of Belgium and the United States, even though if he still had citizenship in Rwanda, once he lands in Rwanda, even if he has dual citizenship, the country that he's in, that citizenship basically supersedes the others. But even so, there is something that could be done, especially since the trial he seems to have been convicted on little to no hard evidence. So just from a legal point of view.
Okay, Alex, let's take it out. I'll tell you what.
Okay.
How about if this is the end of the going viral political analysis show for 22nd of September 2021, and we've had Alexander Stavropoulos, Ken Aaron, Dennis Goldstein, Jim Dingeman, and Michael Jankowitz, and that's it. 5 people. Pretty good. An enjoyable evening, and we're going to go out with our theme song. So, and then I'll stop recording after we play the song, because it's starting to catch on. I'm starting to like the song. Let's see if I can play it here. And there it is. Okay, good night, everybody. Here comes the song.
The world has caught a virus, so I've written you a poem. We need
Oh, he's getting caught up.
Yeah.
Okay, I think he's got the virus. Maybe he caught the virus.
Yeah. Maybe he had a biopsy.
Yeah, biopsy. Okay, well, that's that. And okay, sacrament.
All right, good job.
That's the word of the night, sacrament.
Good job, guys.
Okay, good night, everybody. Thanks for showing up, Jim.
All right, Mike. Yeah.
Nice to hear from you.
Okay, guys. Alex, I'll see you tomorrow.
All right. I'll probably see you tomorrow, Mike. Yeah.
Good job, Alex.
Okay.
Yeah, take care, Jim.
Okay, great job.
Oh.
Okay, guys.
Good
night.
Okay, Ken. Yeah.
Good job.
Have fun.